Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Gavinsky's Tutorials. Today I'm looking at Cube Synth Pro by Virsyn, and this is a really brilliant synth. So Cube Synth, the original version, has been around for years, but it was never made audio unit. So this is an audio unit version, and it's also improved in terms of functionality. Also, it's had some interface changes. One of the most important things is that this is actually now MPE compatible. And even before this was MPE compatible, in some ways what Virsyn were trying to do with the original one was bring some of the complexity of expression that you can get with MPE without actually having MPE technology developed at that time. So it was already a synth capable of great complexity. Now it's capable of even more complexity. But the thing is about this synth, you can use it on different levels. Like, for example, there's a lot you could do by just staying in this little page that we've got here, this main page. But there's also a lot that you could do by going in to the other pages, and we'll look through these other pages in a minute and see what's what. So now here we're on the main page. We can call this the cube page or the 2D page. Now, by the way, in the standalone app, there is also a built-in keyboard. I'm going to focus on using it as an audio unit. And I'm going to do a pretty thorough walkthrough, but I want to make a few things clear. First thing is, my channel, as you know, I put out a lot of videos. I try to focus a lot on apps that have just come out because people urgently need good tutorials that are going to help them make decisions whether they should buy something or not. I also want to, as much as possible, show people how to use the app without them having to slog through the manual like I have had to do. But this also does mean that sometimes when there's a very complex app like this, there's no way that I understand it in the same level of detail that I will do if I keep working on it for months. But for a channel like mine, that's not even possible, because once I do a video on something, I'm often off to make the next video on something to educate you guys about the next new app that comes out. So I have a decent understanding of this, but I'm not going to pretend that I understand everything to the extent that I would like to. Nevertheless, I think this video is going to be extremely useful for people. Another thing I want to mention in the introduction is I've got 5 copies of any Virsyn app. So not just this, any Virsyn app, to give away to subscribers to the channel who are watching this video in the first 2 or 3 days of release. All the details of what you've got to do to win are in the pinned comment at the top of the YouTube comment section. So take a look there, and even if you're a regular, please read that carefully every time, everyone. All right, so let's have a little listen first and a little quick look through the interface, get a general overview of things. So as I say here, we're on the main page and we've got a preset. This is a pad preset called Drop-in Partials. I'll use this to just show you a couple of things about what's going on this main page. So the first thing you'll notice is these little balls moving, right? So these represent different voices. If you look down the screen here, I'll use my mouse. If you look here, okay, voice 1, voice 2, voice 3, polyphonic synth. So we're seeing the journey of each of these voices. Now, what does this journey show? Basically, it shows a morphing. What is happening here? If we look here, we see A, B, C, and D. These are called sound sources. Now, in this particular preset, what is happening is that our preset is morphing from sound B. And we can see when we click on B, there are a lot of different things in here connected to how the additive synthesis in this is set up. This is an additive synthesizer. If we come over to A, we see a bunch of different things that will determine how this source sounds. By the way, notice also a lot of randomization buttons, which we all love in this. So what we're seeing here is that over the course of time, as I keep this note sustained, it's changing from beginning with sound B, whatever way it's set up in sound B in there, is changing over time to sound like sound A. And this can be incredibly complex, and there can be all different kinds of setups of this, including massive amount of points here that it can morph between, and we'll see those later. So that's what's going on with this particular preset. Now, if we see in here, for example, we can see there's some very interesting stuff going on with filter morphing here. One cool thing we can do if we like the filter morphing in this, for example, is that we can use this tools menu. We can copy this particular filter setup and we can paste it into a completely different preset. So that's really cool. And by the way, there are also a lot of different setups, like let's just change this, for example. So here you see this represents a filter of a soprano A sound. Well, I should say. So you see how the formants there have changed. I mean, this is just looking at the filter section, right? So, like, we can change parameters. I mean, first of all, we can change things directly ourselves by drawing them in. But we have, for all of these, we have huge amount of things we can choose. So, for example, here we've got level. So these are the levels of these formants. We've got, what, 512 formants potentially. We can lower that amount if we want, by the way. So one thing we can do is we can just draw these in. That's also going to change the sound. But again, we can also select from tools, and we can select different kinds of waveforms that we can put in here. So we can do this for all these different sources. So you could morph from one waveform type, one certain type of panning, for example, in A sound source, morphing over to B, having completely different attack and decay, for example, in B, then morphing over somewhere else and going back and forth between different places. We can just do incredibly complex things. So these little balls that represent the voices don't just look cool. No, they help us to understand what's going on. But there's another screen that's going to show us in even more detail what's going on, and I'll get to that later. Now we can see also here that we can assign modulation sources to change what happens in these x-axis and y-axis. I won't look at that now, we'll look at that later in the video. Another thing I want to look at here is some global controls. Let's just change preset. Okay, let's take this. So for example, here we can change our unison. So we can fatten things up. And we can bring in a detuning effect to get this kind of lovely analog, slightly out of whack oscillators type sound. Even with the unison set to 1, we can still get this kind of detuning stuff. So we also have this universal brightness knob. Now, of course, we can set up the brightness ourselves in each sound source. So this is just a universal parameter, but we have much more detailed control if we wanted as well. Now, this time knob, if you're playing with this and it doesn't do anything, then what you can do is go down here, down to the bottom right, click on envelope, and if we look here, we'll see that sync is on. If sync is on, that control, that knob we were just trying to move, will not do anything. So let me turn sync off here, and we'll come into this page later and look at this. So you can see times 0.1, so that's basically dividing the time it takes to traverse its envelope. And that means it's basically going through the envelopes faster. And if we take it up here, it's going slower. Love this. Okay, now over here we have another universal control, pan spread. Let's see if we can hear it in this one. We might need something simpler. Okay, you hear the way that's panning? So what you can hear is each of these voices is panning completely differently. So this will give us variation in the independent, in the panning of independent voices, which is a really nice thing to have. If we have this at a value of 0, there's no panning. Each voice is coming from the same place in the sound space. So I really like pan spread. A very important one, definitely, because we can, if you notice, I mean, some of these presets have been a little bit quiet, and especially it depends if you're playing a lot of voices, for example, they can get loud. But if you know that you're going to be playing something where you're playing fewer voices, you may want to put the volume up a lot higher. So this volume button is incredibly important. Like, that sounds amazing like that now. Here we turn the amount of global effects on and off. So again, these pages, if we click through, so what we see here is what the next page is going to be. What we see here is what the page before is called. So if I click on this, we're going back to this page. So this page is called the 2D page. I do find this a little bit confusing, actually, because you never actually see the name of the page you're on. You always see the name of the next page, which is the envelope page, or the last page, which is the FX page. I'm not that crazy about how this has been done. I always find it a little bit confusing. I would love it if there were just some buttons somewhere up here that we could just immediately press to get to which page we want to get to, rather than having to do this scrolling through pages that we don't want to see to get to the ones that we want to see. In fact, in general, there are definitely things that I don't really like about this interface or the UI, but I must give Virsyn top marks for creativity. It's a very cool synth. Definitely UI-wise, I'm not crazy about it. If I compare this, I mean, I know I always do this and it's kind of unfair, but I always say Bleece are setting the standard for me currently for what a nice iOS interface in 2021 looks like. And this just doesn't. I'd really love to see Virsyn revamping their interfaces a little bit. This doesn't bring joy to me to look at this interface. Anyway, If we come to the FX page then, so we can see that delay is on, chorus is on, and here the common effects are on. We can turn all these off by doing this, by just pressing this. So basically, if we go back to that page that we were on, here, this is just going to be reducing the global amount of effect. So it's very similar to what, it's exactly what this is doing, this knob here. Okay, so a couple of dice here. Now if you notice when I press this dice, you're not seeing anything changing. But let's open B, for example. Look at what this waveform looks like for level. Do you see that that's different? Let's go out again and see if we can get a more obvious difference right there. You can see that's completely different. So basically, this is changing aspects of B sound source. Now, this thing here, this is just going to change the level of B sound source. So let's click that. So that's changing this, but it's not changing anything in these other things. This one can change all of these things, right? So these are different. One thing I would like to see, because I think it can be confusing, especially for beginners, to remember what dice do what exactly. I personally would like to see little labels on the dice to remind people, even if it's only a couple of the first letters of a word, to remind people what they're randomizing, because that can be confusing at first. Particularly this one, when you're on this page and you're pressing it, you're kind of going, well, I don't see any visual representation of the changes here, because all of that stuff is going on in here. So again, this dice, in this view, that's changing these level settings. Here, that we can randomize pan position. Here we can randomize attack, decay, filter, and noise. Now remember, when you do these things, whether you actually hear anything or not is going to depend on what type of setup you've got here, how the morphing is it actually ever going to be? Because in some of the ways we can set this up, like let's say, for example, we just have a line that's going here to here, and when I do a voice, it just moves down here. That means it's morphing from A to D, and it's not doing anything with B whatsoever. So this is something you have to pay attention to. Now, if we look at this dice over here on the left, this one we will see immediate visual feedback. Because that is changing the envelopes. So you can get some really great results out of the randomization in this. Some developers add randomization to their products that is just not interesting at all, and it sounds like crap basically. And you can keep randomizing, you're not going to get anything interesting. Virsyn, the randomization is brilliant. I don't know how they're doing it, but it often produces really interesting musical results. But one thing I would say is, if you do randomize and you like what you get, make sure that you save it. Because one thing I don't like is there is no undo and redo button. Very often when I'm using randomization in a synth or in an FX app or whatever, I maybe randomize something and then I skip past it. And then when I come to the next one, I think, oh, you know what? Actually, I really liked that last one. But if you don't have an undo button, there's no way to go back. So I would love if this had an undo and a redo. And I did mention it to Harry. Me and Harry have been in regular touch. Harry, the developer of Virsyn. I think there are a couple of them, but anyway, I'm always in contact with Harry. Great guy. He's been super helpful in answering my questions. Like, we've had a lot of correspondence about this. I've given him a few good ideas about things, and he's given me lots of advice about things that I didn't understand very clearly. So, Harry, thanks a lot. Top guy. As I say, I've given him ideas too. Like, for example, it was my suggestion that instead of, because what this used to be like was you had this morphing section in here, and then over here you had this more complex envelope that you could see for volume, x-axis and y-axis. But you couldn't see when you were making changes in here. You couldn't see what they were doing because this was not here. What you had to do was keep jumping back, sort of looking at this screen. So I suggested, let's have them both on the same screen. So he's been a great receptive developer that took on board a few of my ideas, and I'm really pleased about that. So let's take a look now at this envelope screen. So I've changed preset for this to something that will hopefully let you grasp this fairly clearly. This can be extremely confusing, particularly if you're using a complicated preset to look at it. So let's take a little look what's going on here. Let me press a key. So if you see here, this represents the initial volume. You see that starting lower volume at the start of attack. They were getting a louder volume. Okay, now then it comes down. You can see here we have actually a couple of decays, so we can set up very complex envelopes here. We'll talk about that in a second. So now I'm sustaining a note. And look what happens if I just keep it sustained. Do you see the way it's looping there? Look at that dot. Okay, look at the purple dot, the way it's going along this line. Now it's orange. So as long as I keep this pressed, it's going to keep looping between these 2 points. Now if we look here, sync is off. If I go back to the 2D screen and I make it faster. Oh, sorry, that was slower. Hang on. Still get a bit confused by this. Right, you can see that now that loop is happening faster. Now what will happen when I do a note off, i.e. when I take my finger off the note, then it's going to follow this. So you can see that this has a very fast release. So first of all, we can drag here to change the curve. We can drag here to change the time. What we're going to have now is a slow release. Let me press and release, and you can hear that's a much longer release there. So you can go in, you can set things up in all kinds of ways here. Now this is just volume that we're looking at. If we look here, what we're seeing is the x-axis. Let me go to a different preset here. Let's go out of pads. Okay, let's try something like this. So Watch what happens here. Hang on. Do you see this little yellow line here? So you see this point here, if we look back here, if you remember when we go to the main screen, I'm sorry, it's very hard to explain this synth. I'm doing the best I can. You may have to watch this video a couple of times to get everything. It's really quite hard to understand and explain on a deep level. So remember that we've got our 4 sound sources, okay? A, B, C, and D. And this is representing them. So this corner represents A sound source. This represents B. This represents C. This represents D. So if we go back into the envelope section, sorry, that's volume. So this point here, when this is at the bottom in the x-axis, it means that it's going to be using source A. Up here, it's going to be source B. This dot, right? If we go to the y-axis, it's a little bit easier because there it's very, very easy to see. Here is B and here is C. Now, let's go through a couple of other presets. Let's make our own one actually. Let's go into envelope here. Okay, I want to show you something very cool. We go in to insert and delete here. What we can do here is we can insert more breaks in the envelope, and then we can do whatever we want with them. We can bend them around in all kinds of ways. Oh, sorry, I gotta deselect that first. Right, so we can bend things around. We can make extremely complex envelopes. They can either be synced or free. If sync is on, we'll see gray lines here that show the divisions, 2/64ths, 3/64ths, and so on. If sync's off, we won't have those gray lines. But so if I want to take a point away, I just again go to insert or delete, choose this, then I press here, and now that point has been deleted. Again, if I want to add a point, as long as this is selected, anywhere I click, it will add points. Okay, but what's really cool is we can go into this tools section, and we have a choice of all these different kinds of envelopes here. For example, we could have an envelope that triggers source A only, and it could be attack, decay, release, attack, decay, sustain, release, and so on. We could have several decay points, but we can also set up these kind of rhythmic things. Look at this, for example. There's very low volume. Hang on. Let me pop out to another preset for a second. See how this one works out. Let's do a morphing one. So here we'll get something that's going to morph from A to B to C to D. See, we've got this rhythmic quality. Now sync's off, so if we go back to this 2D page and we go to time, we can really speed that up and slow it down. Now, there's one thing, and I've sent Harry an email about this, but I still haven't had a reply. But I had to get down to making this video today. I was really running out of time because the release of this is imminent. one thing I don't understand is there seems to be, if we're on sync mode, there doesn't seem to be any way to just quickly double or halve or whatever the sync values. So maybe by the time I get to the end of this video and I haven't uploaded it to YouTube and stuff yet, maybe by then I'll have had a reply from Harry and I might be able to address that. But it seems to me that that's something missing here. A quick, easy way when we set up complex rhythmic things. Like for example here, how do I just quickly change all of these? You know, because if I'm using sync, when I go to the 2D page to change this time, it won't have any effect. So what's the equivalent? This works for speeding up and slowing down unsynced rhythms. So what's the equivalent for speeding up or slowing down synced rhythms? I don't know. I don't know how I just double the speed of this, halve it, whatever. So this is a little bit confusing for me. Now another thing I need to show you here, we have mode, slide, and fix. So if I have slide on, when I select this point and move it, these other points will also move relative to it. But if I have fix on, it will be able to move, but it won't be able to change the position of the other points. So that's another thing worth paying attention to. We can go in and set all kinds of crazy stuff up here. But you know, I would say that a lot of users of this synth are going to prefer to just stick to the main page and play around with randomizations and see what cool stuff they come up with, and then just play around with some of these macro controls. And then you may just want to come in here and just do little tweaks, like little things with the volume, with the envelopes. Add a bit of attack, for example. Lengthen the loop points and so on. So it's a synth, like I said earlier, you can get extremely deep with it, or you can stay on a reasonably shallow level without having to study too much and still get extremely cool musical results. Now, another thing we need to talk about is modulation. So if we see on this page, here it says none. That means that brightness is currently set to 1% and it's not being modulated. Now, I've got my keyboard connected here. So I'm going to show you, now you don't need to use MPE, we could modulate this with all kinds of things. Look at what we've got here. For example, we could modulate with velocity. So I could use the AUM keyboard for that. And it would mean that the velocity would respond, or sorry, the brightness would respond to the velocity of the keys. Remember on AUM, here we play here, that's low velocity. We play here, that's high velocity. So we don't need MPE, but one cool thing, for example, if you've got an MPE controller, it's often nice to assign MPE timbre to modulate things. In this case, when I play my keyboard, where I play on the y-axis is going to modulate the brightness. So if we look here, we see a lot of different things that can be mod sources. And I'm not going to go into all of these things. There are even a few things here that I'm not 100% sure what they are. But I do want to mention one contribution I'm proud that I made to this was earlier this did not have note off velocity as a modulation source. If you're an MPE user, particularly if you're used to the way Rolly have set up their synths, which to me are some of the best set up MPE synths that there are. I mean, they make MPE controllers, so it's in their interests to have synths that really make the most out of the MPE protocol. Then they often have presets that make use of note off velocity, make it really, really interesting. And so many synths on iOS that claim to be MPE do not even have note off velocity as a modulation source. If you're doing that, I'm sorry, your synth is not fully MPE. So I did say to Harry, please add note off as a velocity source, and sure enough, it's been added. So that's great. So I'm going to show you a few examples of modulation. So here I've got a preset that I made. Now I've given these extremely uninspirational names because I just wanted them to remember what their function was. I wanted to remember what their function was. Aftertouch morphs D to C pitched up. So if you look here, you can see D is moving over to C, and what's happening here is on my C board, now I'm pressing the key very softly. So basically I'm not applying much aftertouch. Aftertouch is basically meaning the pressure after you've made initial contact with the key. So this is one thing you can do. You can't do this really on a piano. You play a piano key, it's either note on or note off, right? But on an MPE keyboard like the Rolly C-board that I'm using, basically here, after I have initially pressed the key, I can add pressure. And what I've done is I've set it up here that pressure is morphing from D to C, and C is pitched higher than D. So I can get things like this. See if we can find some other things. So here's another one with some aftertouch. So you hear how I'm getting this wow, 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 wow. I'm doing that by adjusting the pressure on the key when I press the keys. Love it, love it. Just go through a couple of presets that I made. Some of these may be using MPE, some not. Yeah, here, velocity making a big difference. Here's an example of a preset where playing with the time setting over here will make a very big difference to how it sounds. So we're basically changing from something like this that is rhythmic to something that's kind of pad-like. If we look at this one, I have MPE timbre, so that means the y-axis on the keys on an MPE keyboard set to modulate time. So when I play the key lower on the y-axis and higher on the y-axis, we'll get changes in speed. Here I'm playing higher on the key, and here lower. So we can do a lot of stuff playing with these envelopes. This would be one to maybe go to the main page and adjust the volume. Now, one cool thing is that the arped patches also respond to MPE, so we can pitch bend between them. And we can get per note pitch bend on the arps, so that's brilliant. If you can hear there are actually 3 notes. 2 of them I'm keeping my fingers stable. On the 3rd note I'm moving that finger, so we're getting only one of the notes pitch bending, the other 2 are staying stable. This is one of the cool things that you can do with arpeggiation in MPE that is not possible with a traditional arpeggiator. So we've looked at most of, well, there's a few things actually on this page we haven't looked at. For example, changing the pitch. This, I guess, is related to the MPE pitch bend. Not 100% sure, to be honest, about that one. Fine pitch. Number of partials. That one might be more noticeable in some patches than in others. Look, I'll mention another thing that I don't really like about the interface here. If I want to go to a new preset, I have to go back to this screen. I find that very inconvenient. You know, sometimes I find myself in this screen. I want to go to a new preset. I gotta, again, you know, scroll between screens and pay attention. Oh, which screen has the presets again? I'd love it if there were the preset forward and backwards button on every screen. So here again, we've got our unison button and detune. So some things get repeated in different parts. Again, here, randomization for the envelopes. By the way, one thing worth pointing out, here, even when we're on volume, you can still see a little kind of shadow of what's happening on the y-axis and the x-axis. For example, look at this, and just remember that this is part of y-axis. When we're in this screen, we can still see that kind of in the background. Same here, it's still there in the background. So you can sort of have a bit of an idea of what's going on in all 3 of these when you're looking at one of them. So let's go to the next screen, ARP. Now the ARP is super cool. So again, we have a randomizer. Let me change the preset for this, maybe actually. Let's just go to an ARP preset, actually. I like this Tron one. Okay. So here we're setting the length, and we can adjust that easily. 5 steps, 8 steps, whatever. Now we can tie notes together. So if you heard there now, those were heard because they're the same note. They were heard as one sustained note. But if we take those ties away, which I'm having difficulty doing here, just got to press each one, I think. See? Okay, press and slide, right. Press and slide. If you hear now, these are being played as separate notes. So we can transpose notes just by pressing. So here, it's being transposed up 5, 4, and so on. Down here, we can change our octaves, and we do this by tapping. So this note will be played an octave up. If I tap a few times here, I start to get to the minus ones. So this is something that I don't like. If it's at 0 and I want to get to -2, I need to keep tapping several times. What I would like to see here is a drag system. I would like, let's say for example, now it's on -2. Let's say I want to get to 2. For me, the logical way for this to be operating would be I press on this, I drag up, and it'll eventually reach at 2. Then I release, and then it will be a value of 2 here. That would be my preference, instead of this constant clicking through. Anyway, this is how we set up octaves. Here we can choose which key number is being played. So just now I was just playing one key, so let me play a bunch of keys. Let me play like 6 different keys. So on this step, it's going to play whatever's on the first key, but it's going to transpose it up an octave. Here it's going to play the second key, and so on and so on. So again, we change these by tapping, which seems kind of cumbersome. Don't really like that. I would really prefer a drag option. Drag and release when you reach the value you want. To me, it would clearly be a million times better system. Now, we also have here all. So what that will do is it'll play it as a chord. So you see every time it comes onto this, it's playing it as a chord. So, you know, although I'm being a little bit critical about some of the way the selection of these has been implemented, I think Virsyn make fantastic arps. Love Virsyn's arps. So here we also have some different choices for how the arp runs. Let's just listen to them to hear the differences between them. Sorry, let me play more than one key. Here you can just press keys, you don't need to hold them down, and it'll just keep them latched. Key sync, not sure about. Check the manual. So here we're changing our time. Okay, that's clear enough. So tempo here won't change because we're using it in a host, so it's synced to host. Then we can add swing. Lock is another thing I can't recall. You can check the manual for that yourself. So again, ARP randomization can come up with some pretty cool stuff. Shorter gates, longer gates, now we can either set the velocity to be whatever velocity was played in by the keyboard, or we can set the velocity here, and then we can add accents and control how much increase in velocity there will be with accents. Now, if we press on these things, we get a lot of other options. Look, randomize, rotate left. Okay, so let's look, for example, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This plus 12 is on the 5th step. We go in here, rotate left. Hey, it didn't work with there. Not seeing any change there. Maybe it doesn't change that. Let's try this. Okay, you can see this has changed, right? So that's been moved to the left. Rotate left, rotate right, randomize all, rotate left all, rotate right all, reset, etc., etc. So get those by pressing over here in this section. And let's go on to the final section, the FX section. And this I'll just look at very briefly because this should be simple enough. So again, here we've got our common, where we can turn the effects on or off. If they're on, we can adjust the amount that is applied. And then, if I'm doing this, it's not doing anything because I need to turn it on first. So here we're adding some drive. We have a choice of different types. I like that hard one. Then we get cutoff frequency appears here. We have a parametric EQ. Okay, I think we're all familiar with EQs, so I won't bother going into that. Let's look at the phaser. Not a particularly interesting patch for the phaser. Flanger. Delay. Again, as soon as we click on it, controls here will change. We can have the left and right delay synced, or we can unlink them. For some reason, every time I press that unlink button, it is jumping out of this view. That must be a bug. No idea what's going on there. Anyway, that's our delay section. Chorus. Reverb. So let's just go through, give you an idea of what some of the presets sound like. So these can get really complex. Let's try some of the MPE ones. So if we look at the envelope page, we'll see, for example, aftertouch connected to brightness. The Y on the key connected to the X-axis behavior. Aftertouch controlling brightness. Okay, so this is an important one to point out. See, what happens when we modulate X or Y axis? For example, here, MPE timbre means that again, that's the Y axis on the key on the keyboard, if you're using an MPE controller. So what's happening here is, if we look at this section here, we'll see it clearly. If you see, I'm touching the key in different places here. It's actually being played higher up the Y-axis. When I touch the key at the bottom of the key, it's appearing low on the Y-axis, and that means that right now, for example, it's playing more of C. But if I play high, it's now playing more of B. So this is very cool. So if we see here, note off velocity is modulating time. So what that means in MPE terms is that okay, note off just means taking your finger off the note, right? But note off velocity means when you take your finger off a note, you can take it off gently, or you can take it off very kind of quickly and aggressively. Especially if you have been playing with heavy aftertouch, like using a lot of pressure. When you suddenly release, you're getting a strong signal for the note off. So you can see that in the way that this is moving over here. When I take my finger off very aggressively, it moves much faster. You see how fast that moved? Now if I do it gently, it moves much more slowly. So here, y-axis is being modulated by MPE timbre, but with a negative value. So what you can see here is, if we look over at the Y here, when I play low on my key, it's appearing near the top of the Y-axis. As I move higher, it's moving down the Y-axis. So again here, X reverse MPE timbre. So let me play near the bottom of a note and look where it's appearing on the X-axis. Now I'm playing near the top of a note. Now it's appearing over on the left side. Play low on the note, it's on the right. Play high on the note, it's over on the left. So again, right side means C. So it's going to be playing these waveforms with this pan position, attack, decay, and so on. When it's over on D, it's going to be doing what's over here. So if we see, for example, we'll think one of the differences we noticed there was pan position, because D is not doing anything special with pan. But well, actually C is not either. Okay, so let's just draw in some pan modulation with C. So let's hear what we get now. You hear how now C is all to the right? Again, watch the Y-axis. Over here, MPE timbre. Play low. It's appearing down in the bottom left corner. Play higher on the note. It's up in the top left. Again, I really wish there were preset menus on every screen. So I think that's given you a good idea of things. Like I said at the beginning, I would need to spend a lot more time with the synth to really get to master it. It's very deep, but again, particularly because of the brilliant randomization options. You don't need to understand it at all to get great sounds from it. Just keep randomizing. Do a little bit of playing with some of these macro parameters like the volume and so on. Go and play with the effects. Play about with time a little bit. And you can come up with some really interesting stuff. And then if you want to go deep, come in here, play around with the envelopes. Do remember that you have a lot of different pre-organized things that you can use for envelopes, for waveforms, for all kinds of things. Okay, so I just want to summarize then with a few things. So this is drinking time now, because there's a running joke in the comments section that every time I say powerful, people have to take a drink, because apparently I say the word powerful a lot. But what can I do? This is a very powerful synth. It's a very powerful synth. As I said, and as I've said many times through the video, it's as easy to use or as complicated to use as you want it to be. You want to keep it simple, stick mostly to the 2D page. You don't even really have to go into these things if you don't want to. But if you really want to get into the nuts and bolts of additive synthesis, get in here, play around with stuff, make things as complicated as you like. And there are some people who are just brilliant at doing that. Like I'm really looking forward to seeing Pixel Hog, one of the guys on the Audio Bus forum, getting in and making presets for this, because he made great presets for AddStation. So that's another additive synth that Virsyn did. It unfortunately is not MPE, so this one has a little bit of an edge over AddStation because it's MPE, but they're both very, very cool synths. So Pixel Hog made great presets for AddStation. I'd love to see him making presets for these. Additive synthesis is not something I have much experience of. So, I'm just guiding you through this, not as an expert, just as someone who has read the manual and has a bit of a clue of what's going on, but there's a lot that I have to learn about this. Really, really deep filter section. I'd encourage you to go in and read about this in the manual and read how powerful this is. It's something that I don't have the time or the expertise to explain in sufficient detail in this video today. Also, the noise section can be really, really cool and interesting to play with. Again, I love the fact that there's randomization for everything. I love the fact that it has copy and paste, so you can take, for example, the formants from a preset that has some real cool vocal filter transformations and just copy those into a completely different type of sound. Like with this kind of synthesis, the sound possibilities are just literally infinite. And you've got them listed here: vocal sources, natural sources, analog sources, and so on. I love the general idea of the synth, the morphing between 4 different sound sources. I think that's very cool indeed. I love that you've got these macro parameters, but what do I not like? Well, first of all, I just don't really like the interfaces. I really think that Virsyn could do with just bringing these interfaces more up to date. They look a bit old-fashioned to me. I don't find them particularly beautiful to work with, and that's important to me. I like apps that look beautiful. I like it when the aesthetic of an app clicks with me. I find that I'm more likely to use it. So I do feel that this is an area where there could be room for improvement. And then another thing is that I just find the whole concept of this synth just a little bit confusing. I am getting my head around it, but it's definitely not the most intuitive thing that I've used. So that I would see more as my limitation, but I would imagine that a lot of other users are also going to struggle with really grasping on a very intuitive level this synth. I think that if people really want to understand how to program this and play around with these X and Y axis things, it's going to take some time. Or maybe not. It depends, If you're the sort of person that likes graphs and you've got a very maths-oriented brain, then that's fine. I don't in particular. I'm more of an arts guy, a music guy. I'm a philosophy graduate, but I was never very interested in the logic side of philosophy. I was far more the type of person who was interested in the Freud, Hegel, Marx, these kind of things. Much more interested in continental philosophy. So this, I feel, is more a synth for the analytic philosopher type of mind. People who do well with graphs and really enjoy these kind of complex graphical representations of things. It's not something that really resonates for me. But I absolutely love some of the sounds that can get out of this. I really appreciate the creativity involved. I really appreciate the massive amount of modulation sources, even if I'm a little bit unsure what a few of them are. So yeah, it's a very interesting synth. Great that it's MPE and that it's a good MPE implementation, that it can do all the aspects of MPE modulation, velocity, aftertouch, slide, glide, and note off, and so on. So well done, Virsyn. And thanks again, by the way, for all the help you gave me, Harry, in understanding this. I really appreciate it. And thanks again for the code giveaway. So remember, everybody, 5 copies of any Virsyn app to give away, not just this. So follow those instructions in the pinned comment, and I'll see you in the next video. Good luck, everyone.